Welcome to the press conference on the policy address. Today, this session will be from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. It will focus on the housing and land policies in the policy address. Hosting the press conference, we have Mr. Paul Chen, Financial Secretary, Mr. Michael Wong, Deputy Financial Secretary, Ms. Benedict Lin, Secretary for Development, Ms. Winnie Ho, Secretary for Housing, Ms. Agnes Au, Permanent Secretary for Housing, and Mr. Vic Chiu, Acting Permanent Secretary for Development, depending on lands. Now, our host will first speak, and then afterwards the floor will be open to questions. Please limit yourself to 2 questions each, and if you want to ask about other policies, please wait till there is the relevant PC session.
唔好意思，唔該。OK 啦嚇。OK， 唔該各位記者朋友嚇。
Thank you. So first of all, we'll invite the Financial Secretary to speak. Dear members of the public and members of friends of the media, good afternoon. Yesterday, the Chief Executive delivered the first policy address of this government. There's a forward visionary thinking and breakthroughs to resolve the constraints and obstacles we face in Hong Kong in terms of our economic and social development. So the policy address is meant to strive for the well-being of the people and to strive for the development of Hong Kong. I and the Deputy Secretary and 2 other principal officials are here to I and the Deputy Secretary, Financial Secretary are here to first give you some ideas about the policy belief on land and housing, and also the future work direction and target. And then the Secretary for Development and Secretary for Housing will give you more detailed explanation about the key policy measures in relation to housing and land in the policy address. Now, on finding land for housing production is very, very important job, and it's also there's a pressing need for us to work on that because it's about people's livelihood, and we could help us to unleash our economic development potential and so on. And then we want the public to have adequate housing and affordable housing as well as improvement to their living condition. And then we also want the public to have room to start their businesses. So small businesses and startups will have conducive environment for the development. In the past few months, we've done much, and we've rolled out various reform measures, and so we want to tackle short-term measures. So that usually resolve quickly. We also need to consider medium to long-term supply. So we need to tackle immediate problems as well as the root of the problem. And then we're also adopting a multi-pronged strategy that covers both near and long-term measures so that we could tackle this long-standing problem of land and housing supply. And then the public will have adequate housing, and there's also room for further economic development. At the start of this government, in accordance with the instructions of the Chief Executive, we set up 2 groups, the Steering Committee on Land and Housing Supply, as well as the Task Force on Public Housing Projects. We want to enhance the quantity, speed, efficiency, and quality of land production. That's mentioned in the policy address on these issues. Today we would explain in more details about the relevant measures, the future direction, and the time frame. Now, I lead the Steering Committee on Land and Housing Supply, and I could sum up our initial outcome. That's on enhancing quantity. Now, with intensive review and cross-department collaboration in the past few months, there is reversal of the stringent land supply situation. We can confirm that in the next 10 years, that is between 2023 and 24 to 2032 to 33, there will be land supply of 3,280 hectares, which is about 10 times the size of Lantau Island, 2 times that of Cheung Kwan O. And also there's an upward trend For land reserved for housing production, we believe that will help provide 493,000 units compared to the demand for 430,000 housing units every 10-year period in recent years. It shows that we have the capacity to actively produce land and also have say on the housing supply. This will help to meet the demands of the public, as well as to allow land for economic and industrial development. And then under the steering committee, we have done projection on land supply for the next 10 years, in particular developable land. This is the first time we have made such projection. This will be one of our indicators. It shows that the government is determined to produce land. And with such an indicator, the public will be able to monitor our work easier. As for the projection details, I believe they've been forwarded to you, and it will be uploaded to the website of the Development Bureau. Second, enhancing speed. We will implement a series of measures to streamline the statutory and administrative procedures on planning, environmental impact assessment, land resumption, and infrastructure construction. We will remove unnecessary steps and save time. And then we'll adopt a facilitator mindset in approving plans and extending the land premium arrangement. In enhancing efficiency, we will make use of innovation technology to speed up production, such as the use of modular integrated construction. And fourthly, to enhance quality, we will improve quality through urban renewal and urban redevelopment and building renewal. And also, we need to provide better quality of living for the public. The waterfront promenade is a popular place for people to go for in their leisure time. And later on, the Development Bureau will give you details of the Around the Island Trail. I hope as you read the policy address, you see the government is definitely determined to address this long-standing problem of housing shortage. So we will produce land and ensure there is a long-term and steady supply of land. And also we take very seriously the need to improve people's standard of living. I have briefly introduced the progress to you. Now Mr. Michael Wong will talk to you about the work of the task force, and then the two other secretaries will give you more details about their respective area of work.
Thank you, Financial Secretary. In a moment, I, along with the two secretaries, will briefly talk about the housing supply policies with the aid of a PowerPoint. I will now talk about the light public housing units. Now, we came up with the idea of the light public housing units. The idea was accepted by the Chief Executive. There's a reason. Now, with the problem of housing supply, the problem lies within the first 5 years. We couldn't further increase the number of units production in the first 5 years. Now, with buildings constructed with concrete, it takes 4 to 5 years to erect a building. From now to 2027, the public rental housing units are at different stages of construction. By the time the units are completed, it will be 6 or 7, 8, 9 years from now. As the Chief Executive said, we have to provide housing in the first 5 years too. We cannot keep people waiting forever for another 6 or 10 years and tell them the problem will be solved, but only then. In the past, the government has accumulated some experience and has come up with a solution. Back in 2017 and afterwards, there was transitional housing. Some projects were completed with the Modular Integrated Construction Method, or MIC. The lesson we've learned is that some NGOs took part in the process. Their strength lies in something other than construction. The projects were completed, but it took time. So for the more than 20,000 transitional housing units, 5,000 to 6,000 have been completed. The remaining more than 10,000 units will be completed. So the goal regarding transitional housing units remains the same. We will have the light public housing units, but we will also have the transitional housing units. Another thing we've learned over the recent years, it has to do with COVID. That we have had in place the community treatment or isolation facilities. We've also adopted the modular integrated construction method in our construction. Buildings were constructed quickly. The outcome is also of high quality. But some worry that aren't they just cargo containers like caged homes? Or you may remember some very shanty buildings in the past. Actually, for buildings constructed through the MIC method, they are constructed quickly and they are of good quality. The components were manufactured in a factory. With these lessons we've learned, if we stick to the old way of constructing public rental housings, then we will have a lot of units completed in the 6 to 10 years, but we will not get many units completed in the first 5 years. We may have more than 100,000 units in 10 years. Therefore, traditional 20,000 units, by 2028, we will have 128,000. There will be a 20% increase in the units completed. That's why we have this initiative with light public housing units. We will be able to further increase the total number of units completed, 158,000 units. In a moment, Ms. Bernadette Lin will tell us more about this. Friends of the media?
Yes, I would like to first explain to you about policy on land development. I'm sure you've heard these four terms frequently: enhancing quantity, speed, efficiency, and quality. But I must stress that as we produce land, it's not just to address our housing needs. We also want to take the opportunity to improve the quality of living of the people of Hong Kong, and also to help to provide Hong Kong with the conditions for further development. So we need to give up on the mindset that as long as there's enough land, it's fine. We need to have a land reserve, so the government and various sectors will have the room to consider innovation. First, about enhancing quantity or boosting quantity. As the Financial Secretary pointed out, this is the first time that we have come up with this 10-year supply forecast of developable land. We'll also make it public. So you see this table you have. After 2026 to 27, you see the light brown portions. Well, that's because we are still conducting many studies, so we cannot yet explain the actual uses of land. But then for these light brown portion, and after planning in future, some will be for housing purpose, some for economic development, and some for community facilities. And in this chart, or in this graph, you'll see the source of developable land in 10 years. The Northern Metropolis, as you can see, it will provide 1,300 hectares of land. We're saying that there will be about 3,000 hectares of land, developable land, so some 40% of that, that is 1,300 hectares, will be available in the next 10 years. And this is spade-ready land, so it's included in our forecast. And then for the Kao Yi Chao Artificial Islands reclamation, we said before that the target is 1,000 hectares of land, and 30% of that is 300 hectares of land, is also available in the latter part of the 10-year period. So for these major land production projects, they will become reality in the next 10 years. As on land resumption, Now, just now we're talking about formed sites. Some land comes from reclamation, some comes from the resumption of existing private land or the use of government land. In the next 5 years, we're going to resume 500 hectares. That's what we know for now. In fact, 90% of the land actually comes from the northern metropolis. Now, I will talk a bit more about the northern metropolis, which is a major project. Now, the strategy was announced last year, or before that, actually, Kutong North, Fanling North, Hong Shui Kiu. We have started development in those areas. But of course, last year, this strategy was introduced, and that has helped to widen the scope and also given new themes to such development efforts. We are pressing on with such efforts, and you can see in this slide that many of the projects are underway or soon to start. So from the second half of 2023 to 2024, we hope to complete these studies, and that from these studies we'll get development plans, and then we'll be briefing you on that. The Chief Executive stressed in his policy address that we need to have an institutional framework for the northern metropolis. So that's why there's a steering committee, an advisory committee, and also a dedicated department, as you can see on the slide. Why do we need this institution setup? That's because the northern metropolis is more than about land production. It's about the synergy between the mainland and the SAR on the Greater Bay Area development, and also it's about integrated use of rural and urban areas, and also there's need to balance conservation and development. And then in the development industry is also a theme. So there are so many themes under Northern Metropolis. We need a proper institutional framework, so that next year we're able to come up with some detailed plans and action agenda for us to take forward our work. Now, I'd like to talk about the development of industries in the northern metropolis. I believe there's great interest in that. Here, there's mention of multi-story buildings and INT land. For multi-story industrial buildings, now we plan to go to the panel on development in November this year to explain our thinking. Briefly, the first batch of sites will become available next year, and hopefully then we could start with tendering exercises. And then we hope that there will be high value added industries taking the lead in industrial buildings. At the same time, we need to reserve sufficient floor area to take care of effective brownfield operators, so they could use these units below market rent, because of course, that the rental level for industrial buildings will be higher than that for brownfield sites. But then with lower than market rental level, hopefully the brownfield operators could move in. So we'll be explaining the details in November. And starting from 2024, near the Santin Technopole, there will be the first batch of sites available for land formation works. So again, we need to move quickly, while we also give thoughts to bringing in innovation and technology operators. The Kaoyichao Artificial Islands will produce 1,000 hectares of land. That's an important land production project for us. And it's important not only because of the quantity, that is the 1,000 hectares, but also because of its strategic location. So it could become the third core business district. And then for our transport network to the west of Hong Kong, it could be further improved. Now we see traffic congestion from time to time, and this project will certainly help that. And because we're talking about newly reclaimed land, so that means there is more room for us to promote the development of modern cities, or what we call smart cities or green cities. So as we strive for better quality of living, this project will give us the room to take this into account. And then another major source of new land would be the Greenbelt Review, as proposed in the policy address. Now, apart from the 1,200 hectares already known, we want to land for the production 225 hectares land, 255 hectares land for the production of 70,000 units. So I'm sure you want to know where this land will come from, and you could see that on this slide. For this 250 hectares of Greenbelt sites, what are the criteria for their selection? Well, we have done Greenbelt reviews several times in the past few years. First, we look at Greenbelt that no longer has any vegetation. And then in the second review, we considered Greenbelt with vegetation, but that would be close to infrastructure or such as roads and so on. And this time we are being more aggressive. We're talking about Greenbelt sites that may be farther away from infrastructure and roads, but with some steeper slopes. And about 30% of the Greenbelt is on private land. That means in future, if we want to build public housing, the government will have to resume the sites. We're also stressing another point this time round. For this 255 hectares of Greenbelt sites, they are counted towards the 10-year supply forecast of developable land. That is an aggressive timetable. It's because our consideration is that for new development area, we want to compress the timetable for producing developable land from 6 to 4 years. And then there's another source of land. It comes from Cheung Kwan O Area 137. As you know, there are 80 hectares of land in this area now used for a fuel depot. Now, when we start the Kao Yi Chao Artificial Islands reclamation in 2025, we want to take that opportunity to make good use of this site. I believe that is public expectation as well. There's criticism in the past that how come we have been doing study for so long and still we don't have any plans for this area. Because one of the challenges is exactly to do with traffic and transport. But then in the policy address, in terms of transport infrastructure, we have proposed that for Cheung Kwan O, there will be the southern extension of the Cheung Kwan O line. Also, there will be the Cheung Kwan O Yau Tong Tunnel as well. So it's because we will have such transport infrastructure in future, so now we are able to consider in more detail the development of this area. We also take this opportunity to see whether we could explore near-shore reclamation of waters nearby. And then we could provide sufficient community facilities and proper transport infrastructure support to residents here. We hope to complete the study within by the end of this year, and then we'll be publishing the plan for consultation.
I will briefly talk about this initiative. This is about the Science Park Pak Shek Kok Station. The government has commissioned the MTR Corporation to do a study. The result comes back as feasible, preliminary feasible. By the end of this year, we will receive the report from the MTRC, and then the government will consider the detailed design in terms of how to proceed in that regard. And also the ratio of public and private housing, and then we would announce the result. Now, in terms of enhancing the speed and the efficiency, this is all about streamlining the procedures. And that comes down to two parts. First, the statutory procedures and the administrative procedures. And in terms of the statutory procedures, by the end of this year, and we will put forward proposals regarding amending statutes. And as set out in the policy address, we'll try to compress the time it takes to turn primitive land to ready sites, 13 years to 7 years for new development areas, and from 6 years to 4 years in other cases. This will be depends on whether the amendment bills can be passed. As the Chief Executive mentioned at the Q&A session this morning, this will require support from the community as a whole and the legislature before we can take forward such work. Now, turning to the administrative procedures. A few points were made in the policy address. The stakeholders want us to get these things done. We have pledged that by the middle of next year, we will progressively put forward proposals. We will go by the existing mechanism. That means we will consult the sectors. Now, some further initiatives about streamlining the procedures. I want to draw your attention to the standard rates for charging land premium. We will extend the arrangement to the farmland in the new territories outside the development areas. In the middle of next year, we will propose the directions. The new territories is a large area. For the standardized rates, there is a duration or the validity of the rate. Do we have to roll things out in phases? These are the things that we will hopefully try to announce in the middle of next year. Turning to the Modular Integrated Construction Method, or MIC. I want to establish this cross-departmental steering committee. The reason is that for the MIC method, we want to have this as an industry. There are policy considerations going into the arrangement. There needs to be basis for storing the materials, certification and quality assurance. The government approval for the work may also have to be adjusted accordingly. Within the Development Bureau, there will be a dedicated team. We look at cases, and we will try to remove some of the barriers in the process. Now, streamlining the arrangement for land lease extension. For a land lease, we're not making changes to the renewal policy or extension policy. When the land lease is due for extension, the government makes a decision. Since the handover, more than 20 land leases have become due for extension. Most of them have been extended. For other cases where extension did not happen, the reason is that we haven't been able to get hold of the owner. For extending land lease, unless there are major considerations concerning public interest, most land leases are extended. And after the extension, there will be a government rent at 3% based on the rateable value. There's no change to this policy since handover. After the government decides to extend the land lease, there are procedures to go through. You may recall reports regarding places like Pok Fu Lam Garden, that more than 1,000 owners are involved. Back then, we did not have the support through the legislation. The leases were entered into between the government and the leaseholders. So the extension agreements had to be agreed on individually, separately. The bank mortgagers may be involved in the process. There are procedures arising because of that reason. That's why we want to go through legislation this time. Say you have a lease falling due in 2025, 2 or 3 years before the expiry date, there will be in the Gazette notice, unless specified otherwise, all land leases falling due on that year will be extended. Doing so will save work in terms of the statutory procedures. Turning to enhancing quality. This is a key measure in the policy address. Speeding up the redevelopment of old districts. First, we want to help the Urban Renewal Authority by making sure they have enough resources. And second, making changes to the compulsory sale application threshold. And there are proposed changes to these arrangements. I want to highlight The fourth part, setting up a dedicated office to provide support to the minority owners. You have a developer submitting a compulsory sale application. Now the minority owners will be worried. In such cases, we want to provide professional information to these minority owners so that they can decide whether they should take the offer from the developers, or the minority owners may go through the lands tribunal and settle this matter through litigation. Now, if the minority owners decide they want to seek professional help, then the dedicated office can provide some funding. And once the tribunal makes a decision, the money can be returned to the government. And when the compulsory sale happens, relocation will follow. The government will also provide information to help the owners. Turning to the last point, around the island trail. There are waterfront promenades in the city, and they are very popular among the people. On the northern shore of Hong Kong Island, the waterfront promenades will be linked up one after another. We want to take this opportunity to link it to the southern district and other parts of the Hong Kong Island. They are roughly 60 kilometers long. Now 20 kilometers or so will be newly constructed or require improvement works. In the next 5 years, hopefully 90% of these waterfront trails can be linked up. I will now invite Ms. Winnie Ho to tell us more about her work. Friends of the media, members of the public, good afternoon. I'm pleased to be able to tell you about the housing policies, the collective efforts of our colleagues. Within 100 days, we submitted a report to the Chief Executive. Where appropriate, he has incorporated our suggestions into the policy address. To providing more decent housing for our people is our common goal. That's why we have a number of measures to enhance the quantity, quality, efficiency of housing units. We have made a lot of effort, and I hope that people can see that. We are being ambitious in what we do, but we are also remaining pragmatic and make sure the measures are workable. This goes to show our confidence and determination to solve the housing problem. The first point is the light housing, public housing initiative. Starting from 2023 to 2024, roughly 30,000 light public housing units will be completed in that 5-year period. We are basing the design on public rental housing units. This time, we will invite colleagues from the Architectural Services Department, the Housing Authority will be involved. Enhancing the speed and quantity will involve a lot of work, so we will get another team involved in the process. In terms of the construction method, we will adopt the MIC, or Modulated Integrated Construction. I want to tell you more about the MIC method. We will adopt a standardized design, so it won't be just getting the containers and turn them into housing units. And we will be making changes to make sure they're suitable for LPH units.
Now there will be bathrooms and cooking areas, and also we'll be providing air conditioners, water heaters, and so on. In terms of rent level, because these is a form of public housing, so the rental will be 90% that of new units in the district. Now, some may ask if there's duplication between light public housing and transitional housing. Now, for transitional housing, there's a target of 20,000 units. We'll keep to that. And for the light public housing, we're talking about 30,000 units as on top of the other 20,000 units of transition housing. I can explain to you in a moment why we're able to substantially boost supply in this way to the tune of 50,000 units. So for those who are inadequately housed, they'll be able to get better housing sooner. And then I'd like to talk to you about the latest forecast under the long-term housing strategy. In the next 10 years, our forecast of public housing demand is 301,000 units. We have already identified enough land for the production of 360,000 public housing units. You can see, therefore, we have sufficient land to meet the demands. The challenge is with the immediate 5 years. So that's why we need to introduce light public housing LPH to substantially boost the supply. In the next 5 years, we believe that we will be producing 128,000 units, and together with the 30,000 LPH units, that means in total we'll be able to increase the supply to 158,000 units, which is a substantial increase of about 50% compared to the production of about 105,000 units previously planned in the previous 5-year period, so there's a substantial increase. We also propose introducing a composite waiting time for subsidized rental housing, and that means we will have both traditional housing and light public housing. Together they will provide better housing for the public, especially for those who are in absolutely appalling living condition. So this will help to improve their living environments as soon as possible. The overall, the average waiting time for LPH, we have set a target. We hope that within 4 years, we are able to reduce the composite waiting time to about 4.5 years. As you recall, the waiting time now, as announced, is 6 hours. As the chief executive has said, he will cap the waiting time at 6 years, and we hope to reduce that to 4.5 years in 4 years' time. The public rental housing advance allocation scheme. The chief executive mentioned such a scheme during his election. When he ran for election, and we've looked at the projects we have at hand, and we expect that in the next 5 years, 12,000 units will be completed earlier. Applicants will therefore be able to move into public housing sooner by 3 to 18 months. Why we're able to achieve this advancement of 3 to 18 months? For example, in Kutong North, Area 19, originally the site was to be formed in one go, but then now, after discussion, there will be 2 contracts. So under the contract, there will be 2 phases. For phase 1, the land will be formed sooner for 4,000 units. That means we will be able to advance the program by 18 months. And then in other sites, maybe there will be a foundation or soil problems, and it may take longer to form the land. But then for others, parts of the site maybe is easier, so we will be able to form land sooner and build the unit sooner. So with such approach, we managed to identify 12,000 units for which the land could be formed sooner. And allocation of PRH. Now, when the occupation permit is approved, or 3 months before that, we would start arranging allocation. We would like to speed things up by 100%, so we'll be able to start the allocation 6 months before the occupation permit is issued, and then we could speed up the whole allocation process, and then as soon as the units are ready, tenants could move in. Modular integrated construction, I'm sure you've heard much about it, MIC. In fact, in the first 5 years, we already preparing the tender and proceeding with various projects. In the first 5 years, we require the adoption of design for manufacture and assembly, or DFMA approach. That means there will be panels, prefabricated elements that will be assembled, and all these elements of course come from factories, and we want to go further than that. Instead of just prefabricated panels, we want these panels to be constructed in a modular manner. So you see the photo, this is the factory. So the whole unit is a modular unit is manufactured in a factory with all the facilities inside. And for the second 5-year period, we require no less than half of the projects to adopt MIC. That will speed up production, and actually will also improve the environment on the construction site. It also is greener because there will be less use of water, energy, and there will be less generation of construction waste. Now on design and build model. We propose that for PRH, for public housing units could be completed in the next 5 years, at least half of those must adopt the design and build contract. Now, in the past, well, there may be different contracts for the foundation, for design, and the actual construction. And now we want to combine such contracts as far as possible, so that there will be the same team under the same contractor. That means when foundation works are ongoing, maybe they could already proceed with design approval in parallel, and then sample rooms could also be set up in parallel. So with everything being done in parallel, it will speed things up. Of course, it's like when we built the makeshift hospitals and so on, we adopted the same approach, and we found it's very effective in boosting speed. On strengthening interdepartmental collaboration, I'll be leading an interdepartmental action group. I would like to thank the heads of various departments, because many departments have to support public housing production. For example, the Civil Engineering and Development Department, it helps with land formation. And then upon the completion of works, the Fire Services Department and the Water Services Department have to help with inspection and approving the accept the project. So they will set up dedicated teams because they're familiar with the design of the project and the construction site. So when they come and do inspection, it will help to speed things up. Now, public-private partnership. There is a pilot scheme on private developer participation in subsidized housing development. We'll formulate a policy framework in the first quarter of 2023, and then we will work out the pilot scheme. On public participation in subsidized housing development, there are 2 types. The first type is the government will identify 3 sites to invite tenders, and then in the tender, it will state that the sale price will be at a discount of the market price. Now, we don't plan to buy back the units. That means the developer must provide units of good quality, so they're able to sell the units. So this is a strategy for quality assurance. And then there are other ideas we're considering. We will be announcing them in the first quarter of next year.
The second category of cases, a private developer may have land at its disposal, and they can rezone the land. They have to pay the land premium. There could be concessions in terms of the premium, but the developer will have to sell the units completed at a discount. Now, these things are something where we will announce in greater detail. The next point I would like to cover, well-being design. For public housing, there is a lot of public space, gardens, for example, other facilities for the elderly or for young children. For each public housing estate, we look at the special characteristics. We propose themes such as healthy living, or green buildings, or gerund facilities, elderly-friendly facilities, in other words, to enhance a sense of well-being among the local residents. The people who live there may take a stroll in the area or socialize with their neighbors. For existing public rental housing estates, we will pick 10 such estates each year. For beautification, we will also pick 20 estates each year for landscape improvement works. Turning to the minimum size for newly built units, our proposal is that starting from 2026 and 27, all units completed from then on will be subject to a minimum size of 26 square meters. Now, for public housing units, in general cases, the internal floor area will have to be no less than 21 square meters. So that we are talking about two areas, sellable areas versus the internal floor areas. For public rental house units, we adopt the internal floor area as a way to look at the size. Enhancing the transparency of land and housing supply. We understand that people take an immense interest in housing and land supply. We will make more information available online. In the first 5 years, in each quarter, we update the information concerning the site, the size of each site, and the number of units on each site, and the expected completion date. In the next 5 years, what's the sites that will be available? This is the kind of information that will become available. Turning to redevelopment projects. The Housing Authority and our colleagues are working on redevelopment project. This is one of their areas of work. 10 projects are different projects of work, some in the relocation stage. In the future, we will pick another housing estate to determine the potential for redevelopment and the feasibility. We will consider the age of the housing estate, whether substantial resources are required to maintain the quality of the housing estate, and room for deployment. When it comes to redevelopment projects, each household has to be relocated. We will announce more details hopefully next year. The housing ladder. Well, we've wanted to provide a housing ladder for people. We understand it's a community aspiration. Apart from the public rental housing, there are also green farm subsidized housing projects and also starter home project. We're offering housing options at different levels so that different people can realize their aspiration of home ownership. In recent years, the ratio or the split between public rental housing and green farm subsidized housing and other subsidized sales flats is at 70 to 30. We will keep this ratio in the next fiscal year. Our plan is to launch a starter home project. Now, for those who are ineligible for home ownership scheme flats, but families with a higher income. For starter home applicants, most of them, more than 85%, are those aged below 40. The project will help the younger ones, realize their dream of home ownership. For private housing supply, according to the long-term housing strategy, the demand will be 129,000 units in the next 10 years. That would be our target in terms of the supply of private housing units. We expect in the next 5 years, through land sale and railway property projects tendering, there will be roughly 72,000 units to be completed, and then we will also have the development projects from the URA and other private developers. The overall supply will slightly exceed the demand level set out in the long-term housing strategy. That's all from me. Thank you. We'll be happy to take questions from the media. We're trying to end at 3:30. Maybe we can wrap up at 3:50 instead. On the third row, the journalist over there. I'm from Shenzhen Satellite TV. My question has to do with the Northern Metropolis. There will be an advisory committee on the Northern Metropolis. How will the advisory committee work? What kinds of experts or people in the community will that cover? Will the examples of the mainland cities be taken into account for the Northern Metropolis? What can one country, two systems do in terms of contributing to this project? Thank you for your questions. There will be two committees, a steering committee on the Northern Metropolis, chaired by the chief executive. There will also be an advisory committee chaired by me. For this committee, there will be SCR government officials and members from the community, people from different districts, and people from professional sectors. Our target is to take in ideas from a broad range of people so that we can achieve good development of the Northern Metropolis. In the context of the Greater Bay Area development, the Northern Metropolis represents a center point. That will facilitate cooperation with Shenzhen and other cities in the Greater Bay Area. Under the advisory committee, there will be a working group, a task force for liaising with Shenzhen. This will be headed by the Deputy Financial Secretary, Mr. Michael Wong. So there are channels for liaison with the mainland authorities, and that is important. In the future development of the Northern Metropolis, there will be innovation, new economic sectors. These sectors will play a key role. We, over here in Hong Kong, have our advantages in scientific research, for example, and protection for intellectual property. We have overseas talent here in Hong Kong. Shenzhen also has its own advantages. It has a number of industry leaders. It is also home to advanced manufacturing companies in Guangdong. There are tens of thousands of advanced technology companies. We can bring together two strong players, and that's important. Thank you. Next question, please.
On the second row to the far left. I'm from Ta Kung Pao. I have two questions. First one, on light public housing, LPH. Now you set the figure of 30,000 units of LPHY, and for these 30,000 units, where will they be? Where do you get the land from? And what is the cost of building LPH compared to traditional PH? Do you not worry about cost at all? And second question is about the 10-year supply forecast of land. So for the 10-year supply forecast of land compared to the 10-year long-term housing strategy production, how do we look at the figures? And is it the case that in the next 10 years there will be just increase but no decrease in the supply of land as forecast? And if there will be variations, what are they? First, I'll invite Mr. Michael Wong to talk about light public housing, LPH. Now, for LPH, we have identified 5 to 6 sites in the urban area, but mainly in the new territories. There is private land to be lent out by private developers. Also, there's government land. We're now in the final stage of our feasibility study, so we cannot really tell you exactly where the locations are yet. But we're working hard on that. So in the next few months, we'll be going to the Legislative Council because we need to secure funding, and then we'll be providing the information then. On cost, if it's cost per square foot, the construction cost of LPH should be similar to that for transition housing. It's not the case that we don't care about cost, because as you know, for transition housing, we have received support in terms of resources from the community. Some have actually made huge contribution. For the 30,000 units, we've set a target for ourselves, actually. We hope that after 4 years, the composite waiting time could be reduced from 6 years to 4.5 years. So with this 30,000 plus units, then we'll be able to achieve that target. Because with 30,000 LPH units, and then there are also going to be 128,000 traditional PH units between 2023 and 2028. So that's why we are confident we could reduce the waiting time to 4.5 years. And if you heard the chief executive at the question and answer session in Leshko, some members asked if he could do more, and he said he would be prepared to consider it. For these 30,000 LPH units, together with the 128,000 traditional public housing units already planned, we're talking about huge workload. So we would first want to proceed with this production first. On land, the supply forecast, 10-year supply forecast of land, let me explain about that. We're talking about land supply for housing, both public and private housing. As for the long-term housing strategy, there is projection of the housing demand in 10 years, and we're talking about completed units. So in one set of figures, we're talking about completed units, the other is about land. So we need to first provide land for housing production. And of course, there will be a gap because in some cases, the targets may overlap, but not in others. For example, in the next 5 years, let's say, we are already building on all the land available for the next 5 years. So we identify land now for housing production. We're talking about a later completion. It's the same with private housing supply, private land supply. Now we sell land, and then a private developer buys a site for development. So between the units are sold and between the land is tendered, there's of course a gap. But then what is important is that in the next 10 years, we have found all the land for public housing production. As for private housing supply, we've also identified all the land for production in the next 10 years. But we have identified more sites, but then that's more than what we need in the next 10 years. So we're confident that in terms of land supply, the government has sufficient land supply to lead or to steer the housing production program. And we even have some reserve land that will help us cope with any fluctuations in the market. The gentleman in red on the third row. I'm from AM730. Now the KPI for public housing waiting time, you have now used this composite waiting time that includes LPH, but LPH tenants will eventually move to traditional PH. So what is your assessment of the maximum wait for traditional housing? How many years do people have to wait, and when can they reach that stage? As for LPH, you didn't tell us about the sites, But then you're saying that you start works soonest next year, and then in 24 there will be 1,000 units completed. So where exactly is this site, or where the government land is? Because for transition housing, they are in northeast New Territories. Even when the units are completed, people are reluctant to move there because it's so far away. So how can you be sure that people will move to the LPH? Also, Financial Secretary, the harsh measures in the property market have been in place for many years. It seems that we're no longer having a fever, but we're still taking the medication. This morning, the chief executive said there is still a need to keep the measures, but why is that? Can you explain that? To what level must property prices drop before the government would relax the harsh measures? Or, how much would the transaction volume have to dwindle before the government will relax the measures? Deputy Financial Secretary, I can't tell you about the size as I explained just now. Please be patient. On transport infrastructure, we'll ensure that there will be proper transport infrastructure for the newly built LPH. So even for those, for the units in LT, there will be sufficient transport support to take people to the nearest train stations, for instance. On the waiting time, perhaps I could ask Ms. Winnie Ho to answer the question. Right now, we have a target of 4.5 years. We're talking about a composite waiting time, because the composite waiting time will give you a true reflection of the resources the government is plowing into public housing resources, both for light and traditional public housing. We believe we should let the public know. And we also will announce the waiting time for traditional PH. Our estimate is that for traditional public housing, the waiting time of 6 years will also come down. Now, some mentioned transition housing. For some transitional housing units completed, maybe there are in faraway places still there is a high occupancy rate. Maybe the low occupancy rate was at the beginning of the completion project, but now occupancy rate is some 80-90%. But of course, people will have individual considerations, and if they don't need to go to work in the urban areas, they would rather pick these remote locations because usually the living environment is nicer. But then others want to live near the urban area, so it's up to individuals. So even for the more remote TH projects, they are rather popular. You asked about harsh measures in the property market. We launched the so-called harsh measures or demand management measures. We did so because at the time the policy considers when there was still a tight supply of housing for permanent residents who did not own properties will have priority to buy properties. That was the policy and objective. Now, you described the property market of being in a fever. That's how you described it. And now, it's in particular this year, because of the economy and the epidemic, there is a slower transaction volume, but still property prices are at a high level. As I consider whether there is need to remove the harsh measures, I will consider 5 factors. The first one is changes in property prices, whether prices go up or down, in terms of speed and range. This is what I consider. Now, it's true, property prices have come down this year. Compared to a year ago, the drop is about 7.5%, but still is at a very high level. It's still at the level at the beginning of 2019. If we compare our property prices level with 1997 and 98, between 1997 and 98, property prices dropped by 32%. So now it's just a minor adjustment. Given the current economic condition and other factors, I don't think we need to be overly concerned. That's the first point. Second point, we have to look at transaction volume of residential properties. In 2013, we introduced demand management measures, and then in the next 8 years till 2020, every year transaction number was about 60,000, sometimes 6,000 plus, 60,000 plus, sometimes just under 60,000. And then last year, 2021, the property market was stable. There were some fluctuations, but not serious ones. And at that time, the transaction number was about 72,000. And this year, on average, is about 4,000. So if you look at the average figures, it's not that much different than that in the previous year. Now, given the current economic situation, of course, there's a consideration. Also, people see that interest rates are going up, and so people are more cautious. And so that's why transaction volume dropped a little. It's to be expected. And the third factor, I have to look at the future supply. If we talk about units completed, this year, by about August, there were 14,000 units completed for the whole year. About 23,000 units will be completed. For previous years, on average, the number is 17,000 units. But then for the period 2000 to 2004, that was the last peak of the property market. At the time, the completion number was about 20,000 each year. So what I'm trying to say is that over the years, yes, we have been able to produce more land for housing supply. So there's an increase in supply, but it's not that substantial. And in the next 3 to 4 years, the government makes an announcement every quarter. In the next 3 to 4 years, the supply of new units remains at 96,000 to 97,000 units. So you see the supply is rather stable. We also have to look at the loan ratio for developers, how much stock they have. And we can see that for the main real property developers, they are not making huge loans. The ratio is not that high. It's not the same as in 1997 and 1998. And developers also are not holding on to a large stock of units. So that's why we don't see an urgent need for developers to, put units on the market. And a fourth factor, we have to consider the economy and economic outlook. Now, on the economy, I mentioned interest rate hikes. And then for the short-term outlook, we have been hit by the epidemic, so we're struggling in a way. And then as the epidemic comes under control, we'll be able to resume normal activities. And hopefully later, there'll be a chance for us to resume travel with the mainland. And if that's the case, then our economy will do better than now. Although there are, of course, many challenges around the world, but still we have confidence because we have the support of the country. And in that sense, you could look at our unemployment rate. Now, at the peak of the fifth wave of the epidemic, the unemployment rate was 5.4%. Now it's dropped to below 4%. And then in 1997-98, in 1 year, from 1997 to in 1998, the unemployment rate soared from 3.3% to 5.9%. So we could see, therefore, the economic situation is not quite the same compared to that period. And then market sentiments, as I explained, people are exercising caution. but then we don't see any panic selling yet. And on demand and supply, we have to consider the interest burden. Now, interest rates gone up quite a bit, so there's a heavier burden on for people paying mortgages. Right now, the mortgage rate is about 2-3%, but then again, back in 97, 98, it was some 8-9%. So again, the situation is not quite the same. And given the current circumstances, we believe there's no need to change the demand management measures.
下一條問題。
Next question. In the third row, the lady in white. In the fourth row, the last row.
We would like to know more about the light public housing scheme. Will the government guarantee light public housing tenants can stay until they are housed in public rental flats? What if they have to leave? Will the government guarantee that they do not need to return to subdivided flats and other poor living conditions environment? And will the government make use of quarantine and isolation facilities, namely Kai Tak and Penny's Bay, as light public housing sites? Also, how did the government come up to the conclusion that it would be unable to front-load the first 5 years housing supply? What works or evaluation has the government done? Thank you.
I didn't catch your last question, but I'll try to answer the first two. In the design of the scheme, applicants for light public housing would have waited for conventional public housing, if I can use that word, for 3 years before they're eligible. So basically, depending on when they can live in the light public housing units, for example, if they have waited already for 4 or 5 years, then actually they would only need to stay in the light public housing units for 1 or 2 years, and then they would be eligible. I mean, they would be allotted public housing units. So that's the intention. Your second question pertains to the current facilities at Kai Tak or at Penny's Bay. They are devoted for the purpose of community treatment or quarantine centers. So that remain the current intention. So for the time being, there's no intention for diverting those units for the purpose of light public housing. Your last question, if you do not mind to repeat that. I'm sorry. Okay.
How did the government come up to the conclusion that it would be unable to front load the first 5 years housing supply?
I can repeat that. I explained that in Cantonese, but I can explain that in English as well. It's objective reality. Currently, for us to construct conventional public housing, it takes almost up to 60 months. So in other words, if we continue to make use of conventional public housing as the only solution, then actually we would not be able to increase the supply for the coming 5 years. That's objective reality. Light public housing is something that we can finish the construction within a period of 12, 18, or 24 months. So that's basically how we come up with light public housing as a solution.
OK， 下一條問題。
Next question. On the far end, in the last row, the lady in the dark suit. I'm from Phoenix TV. Sorry, could you speak up? And the government sells its land through tender exercises. Will there be a review in terms of rolling out the land for sale? Will there be a review of the way that land is auctioned to increase incentives for developers to buy government land? And there are concerns about consistency in government policy. People are worried about sudden U-turns. In Kai Tak, for example, some plans fell by the wayside. What follow-up actions will be taken? in terms of construction and resuming land, how would the government balance the different interests involved? Just then the financial secretary reassured us, saying that we don't have to worry about the home prices. But given the continuous rate hikes, there are high loan-to-value ratio. People are taking out such loans, they're worried about becoming negative equity. Are you worried about a collapse in the home prices? In terms of the composite waiting time for public rental housing, we have come across people who have waited for 9 or 10 years for public rental housing. Will there be follow-up actions taken in such cases, and how will you fix these problems? I'll try to recall the questions you have just put to me. Now, will we be selling more land? As you mentioned in another question of yours, the consistency of government policies. Now, I can say with certainty that transactions are on the low side recently. The correction is like to 7 to 8% over the past year, but we will continue to sell more land plots. In launching policies, we have to keep at it. After a land site is sold and then it's made available on the market, the process takes time. In the current environment, we will have to continue to make land available for sale. In terms of the land premiums, it depends on the circumstances. We're going to do auction instead of tender. Now, both methods involve some form of competition. In a tender exercise, this is something that has worked all along. Now, we don't see anything urging us to change this method. Now, you mentioned the cases involving high loan-to-value ratio mortgage loans. Now, there's reports saying that there are more cases of homes foreclosed by banks. In such cases, the report goes like this. The Hong Kong Mortgage Corporation is involved. And for those buying a home below $10 million, and people can take out a loan up to 90% of the loan ratio. For the $10 million to $12 million homes, people can take out a loan that is 80% of the home price. Now, do these cases have to do with these plans I just mentioned? Unlikely. It's unlikely. Now, for the clients of the Hong Kong Mortgage Corporation, now for those who fail to make timely repayment of their mortgages, they make up not 1% of such cases. So that's one case out of 10,000 clients. Now, for repossessed flats, it has to do with deposit-taking companies or second or remortgages. Now, for negative equity cases, when you compare Q2 to Q1, you see a drop in the number. There may be a slight increase in Q3 because we see a greater correction in home prices in Q3. We looked at the Q1 and Q2 figures. Often, these are loans involving bank staff. Now, they may have received help from the bank in terms of their home loans, so they are given a high ratio in terms of the mortgage loan, sometimes 100% of the property value. Now, if I've left out any of your questions, please let me know. There's little mention about the high-tech infrastructure projects in the policy address. Will there be follow-up actions? Now, the Deputy Financial Secretary. Some years ago, we mentioned this EFLS initiative and elevated an environmentally friendly project. I was the Secretary for Development. In simple terms, the EFLF was not a realistic option when we came to the point about constructing the unit. in Kwun Tong. Now I have to keep this short. It's unrealistic and it's very pricey to construct the infrastructure. When you look at the recurrent costs, we will be operating at a loss. There are alternatives, eco-friendly buses, pedestrian footbridges, and ferry services. So there is a reason behind this change in the government's policy. The government's position has been consistent. Due to a time constraint, we will take the last question on the far end in the third row, the lady sitting in the middle. The last question. Please keep your question succinct. I'm from Oriental Daily. There's mention of redevelopment involving a public housing estate. Can you tell us which estate this is? We don't see a lot of redevelopment projects mentioned, but there is this well-being study. But how would you look into the well-being level? Now, how will your thematic designs improve the living environment at 5 housing estates? Next question touches on the wait time. There will be a composite waiting time. You're trying to cut it down to 4.5 years. But there are people who are already on the wait list for conventional public rental housing. What will the government do to shorten the waiting time or cap the waiting time? Could you elaborate on how you will get that done? I'll take the last question first. And Ms. Winnie Ho will address the points about the well-being study and the other point. As the chief executive said, the composite waiting time will better reflect the situation. This is about the people affected by the measures. We look at the composite waiting time. That person look at the figure, and then they will be able to tell how long they have to wait before they can be housed. For light public housing units and conventional public rental housing, these are decent housing. Now, someone may be living in a subdivided unit, inadequate housing, in appalling condition. That's why the chief executive believes the composite waiting time is the best way forward. As Ms. Winnie Ho just said, we will continue to make available the waiting time for conventional PRH units. Due to the time constraint, I will talk about the well-being design. I'm an architect by profession. There's public space, common areas in public rental housing estates. Take the waterfront promenade as an example. There's screening. There are chairs. If you can improve such designs, people will be pleased to enjoy such facilities. We want to compile guidelines so that for public housing estates completed in the future, when it comes to greening and facilities for the elderly and children, then the facilities can be enhanced. For the Housing Authority and the Housing Department, we're working on 10 redevelopment projects. That's a lot. There are major projects and other projects involving industrial buildings. We have to arrange relocation for each household. We have to have new buildings available and move the people there before we can take forward the redevelopment. For the upcoming redevelopment projects, we will have to keep looking into how things can be done. We're doing some internal review. In next year, perhaps by the middle of the next year, we will be able to announce more details. Thank you all. That concludes the press briefing. Thank you.